The story begins not in silence, but in whispers. Whispers that traveled through hallways, plantations, political chambers, and the secret corners of American history. It is the story of a president, a nation still struggling to define itself, and a woman whose existence was never meant to be written down. Her name was whispered, her life hidden, her children erased from the official record. Yet the truth lived on in the shadows, refusing to die, refusing to be forgotten, refusing to let the world pretend that the past was cleaner than it was. In the early decades of the United States, everything looked polished on the surface. The leaders spoke of liberty, democracy, equality, words that rang loudly in speeches and documents, but the reality beneath those words was tangled, contradictory, and deeply painful. The president at the center of this story lived at the intersection of power and hypocrisy, shaping a nation publicly while shaping a secret family privately. The world saw him as a statesman, but the people closest to him knew a different man, a man who loved, desired, and fathered children with someone society refused to see as fully human. The woman who bore his children was his wife's enslaved sister, a quiet reminder that even in the homes of the powerful, slavery stretched its fingers into every corner of life. She lived in the same household, served at the same table, heard the same voices reading poetry and political philosophy, yet she was just furniture in the eyes of the law. She never had the luxury of consent. Her body was not her own, her future was not hers to determine, but she had children, children who carried the blood of the president, children who would become the threads tying together the most uncomfortable truths of early America. Late at night, when the noise faded and the candlelight dimmed, the president walked quietly through corridors that held more secrets than brick and mortar. He was a complicated man, shaped by ambition and fear, shaped by a love he could never openly acknowledge. His relationship with his wife was one of duty, shared history, and political alliance. But his relationship with her enslaved sister, beautiful, intelligent, and bound, was something he never admitted publicly, not even in the writings he left behind. Yet his actions spoke louder than anything he ever wrote. He gave this woman certain freedoms others in bondage never saw. He allowed her children to be educated, clothed better, fed better. He watched them grow, their faces reflecting parts of him he could never deny. It was impossible to look at them and pretend otherwise. They carried his eyes, his jawline, his features. They were his legacy as much as the speeches he delivered or the laws he signed. But they were not given his name. They were not acknowledged on paper. They lived in a world that forced them to exist in a strange, painful in-between. They were too white for the slave quarters, too black for the president's home, too connected to power to be dismissed, too connected to slavery to be accepted. They were children of a president, born to a woman who could not refuse him, a woman history tried to bury. The years passed slowly, each one shaped by political tension and personal contradiction. The country grew, expanding its borders, fighting wars, negotiating treaties. The president upheld the institution of slavery publicly while fathering children with someone enslaved privately. He lived in a house where every wall held memories that never made it into official records. He saw his children grow into young men and women, intelligent and strong. Some would eventually be freed quietly, granted opportunities to live as almost free people. But they could never escape the complex truth of their existence. At night, when the president found moments of quiet, he thought of them. He wondered what kind of future waited for children born into a system designed to erase them. He wondered about the woman who slept in the same home as him, but lived in a different world entirely. Her life was shaped by forces beyond her control, yet she carried herself with resilience, strength, and grace. She held her children close, knowing the world would never treat them as equals. Sometimes she looked out of the window at the grand landscape, at the fields where enslaved people labored from sunrise to sunset, and she thought of the impossible path her life had taken. She had been born to the same parents as the president's wife, yet their lives could not have been more different. One sister was raised in privilege, dressed in fine fabrics, taught to read, married into power. The other was born into slavery, owned by the sister she resembled. Fate had written their story with a cruel, dividing hand. And in this injustice, the president found a strange and painful affection. Did he love her? Or did he love the idea of her, the quiet presence, the familiarity, the forbidden closeness? Did he see her humanity, or did he simply feel entitled to her? History can only guess, but the children prove that something existed in that space where power and desire collided. Their faces grew clearer in features that mirrored the president's own lineage. They watched him from the shadows, saw him walk through the house with authority and confidence. They learned to hide their emotions, hide their curiosity, hide the truth written in their very bones. The older they became, the harder it was to pretend. Visitors noticed, servants whispered, politicians muttered. But no one spoke openly, because the cost of truth was too high. The president needed silence. The legacy of the family required silence. The nation demanded silence. And so silence became the cloak around their existence. But silence is never permanent. As the years passed, the world outside the plantation began to shift. Abolitionists grew louder, newspapers more daring, and enslaved people more rebellious. Families like the president's, families built on secrets, found themselves standing on unstable ground. Every passing decade brought the country closer to a reckoning, and as history moved forward, so did the story of the children who bore his blood. Some of them left the plantation quietly, once they were granted freedom or loaned opportunities in the North. They carried the weight of their origins with them, but were encouraged to create new identities, leaving behind the truth that might destroy the image of the president. Others chose to stay, tied by emotion, fear, or the simple fact that freedom without a home was no freedom at all. They walked the same paths their mother had walked, watched the same sunsets, felt the same contradictions. Their mother aged slowly, each year deepening the quiet dignity she carried. She saw her children grow into adults who lived in two worlds but belonged fully to neither. She loved them fiercely, knowing the world would never understand them. She held memories they could never fully share, memories of a man who acknowledged them privately but denied them publicly. The president knew his time in power would one day end, but he did not know what would become of the family he created in the shadows. He struggled quietly with the legacy he was leaving, the official one carved into public monuments and the secret one carried in the smiles and laughter of children he could never call his own. And when the end of his life approached, the divide between those two worlds became impossible to ignore. His wife sensed pieces of the truth she had long tried not to face. She saw the resemblance her enslaved sister's children bore to the man she had married. She felt the weight of betrayal, the weight of knowing her own sister had been trapped in a life she never chose. But the norms of the time left her with nowhere to direct her grief or anger. She lived with the ache in silence. The funeral that marked the president's passing was grand, attended by leaders, military figures, and respected citizens. Tributes praised his leadership, his intellect, his accomplishments. They spoke of liberty and democracy, the same words that had always sounded beautiful in speeches. But far from the public eye, the woman who had borne 6 of his children sat quietly, holding her grief in a place no one would acknowledge. Her children stood nearby, neither included nor excluded, wearing expressions shaped by a lifetime of secrecy. History continued, as it always does, reframing stories, altering narratives, burying truths that felt inconvenient. Generations passed, and the official record told only half the story, but the descendants of the secret children carried the truth inside them, truth passed down in family stories whispered at night, in old photographs, in inherited features that never matched the names written on documents. As America moved into a new century, historians began to uncover pieces of the puzzle. DNA evidence, letters, journal entries, and oral histories formed a mosaic that pointed toward the truth the president had never admitted. The story of the enslaved sister and her 6 children moved slowly from rumor to possibility, from possibility to likelihood, and finally from likelihood to truth. Today, the world looks back at this hidden chapter of history with a mixture of shock, sadness, and clarity. It reveals the contradictions of early America, the humani. Thank you of those silenced, and the complexity of a president who shaped a nation while shaping a family he never fully claimed. And so the story continues, one of power, silence, love, coercion, betrayal, and the resilience of children born into a world that tried to erase them. It is a story that forces the modern world to confront the truth that the past was never simple, never clean, never what the textbooks claimed. It is a story that survived because blood remembers what paper forgets. The years that followed the president's death were years of unraveling for the secret family he left behind. The plantation, once bustling with activity, became quieter. The political visitors stopped arriving. The household staff changed. The rhythms of life shifted with the passing of the man who had silently governed the fates of everyone living under his roof. His wife, now a widow, walked through the halls with a solemn grace, her footsteps echoing in spaces that once felt filled with purpose. She had always known, deep down, that her sister's children were connected to her husband, but grief made the truth feel heavier. Every resemblance felt sharper, more painful, more undeniable. She did not mistreat them, but she could not embrace them either. They symbolized a wound she never had the language to express, and so she lived beside them in a fragile quietness, navigating a life that had been shaped by society's expectations and her own unspoken heartbreak. The woman who had borne the president's children moved with a different kind of grief. Her sorrow was layered. Sorrow for the man she could never claim, sorrow for the life she never chose, sorrow for her children who would now face the world without the protection that had come from their hidden father. She had spent years balancing fear and hope, knowing the president could shield her children from the worst of the plantation. Brutality. With him gone, that shield faded like the final glow of a candle. Her children saw the changes too. They noticed how white neighbors looked at them longer, how whispers grew louder, how the boundaries of where they could go tightened. They were no longer the half-hidden fixtures in a home protected by political influence. They were vulnerable, suddenly more exposed to the harsh realities of a society that categorized people with ruthless efficiency. The eldest son felt the shift most deeply. He had inherited more of his father's features than any of his siblings: high cheekbones, a pale complexion, eyes that reminded people of the president in ways that made them uncomfortable. All his life he had been told to avoid attracting attention. But now, attention found him whether he wanted it or not. Some white neighbors treated him with open suspicion, others treated him with a strange, uneasy respect. Enslaved people on nearby plantations looked at him with curiosity and confusion, unsure of who he was meant to be. He belonged nowhere fully, and everywhere only partially. His mother told him often to stay quiet, to be careful, to avoid angering anyone. She knew how dangerous the world was for a young black man with features that made people ask questions. She feared for him in a way only a mother could, and yet she also knew he carried an intelligence and determination that could not be contained by fear. He watched the world and learned from it. He saw how people with power treated those without it. He saw how lies became truths simply because powerful men spoke them. He saw how freedom was a word with many meanings, depending on who spoke it. His younger siblings followed his lead. They looked up to him as the anchor in their shifting world. Their mother worked tirelessly to teach them resilience, strength, and dignity. She whispered stories to them at night, stories of their grandmother, their roots, their history, stories about love woven together with sorrow. She wanted them to understand where they came from, even if the world demanded they hide it. As the years passed, the country moved closer toward an inevitable clash. Rumors of rebellion spread. Newspapers filled with debates about slavery. Political tensions swelled like gathering storm clouds, and in households like theirs, families built on contradictions, the rising tension was felt with every breath. The eldest daughter, quiet and observant, often sat at the edge of social gatherings listening to the conversations of white visitors. She heard them speak of abolitionists with scorn, of northern agitators with suspicion, of enslaved people with fear. She understood, even as a child, that the world her mother had brought her into was fragile. She saw how the white women in the community treated her mother, polite on the surface, cold beneath. She sensed the bitterness hidden behind their smiles. She watched her aunt, the president's wife, move through the world with a sadness she never shared aloud. Sometimes their eyes would meet across a room, and in that quiet gaze there was a recognition neither could name. They were sisters' daughters, but one lived as a lady and the other as property. The cruel divide between them was written into the foundation of the nation itself. The son who resembled the president most closely began to wonder about a life beyond the plantation. He asked questions, not out loud but in the quiet of his mind. What did the world look like beyond the fields he had known his whole life? What future could exist for someone like him? He was neither fully accepted nor fully rejected. He lived in limbo, and as he grew older, limbo became suffocating. Their mother sensed his restlessness. She feared it, especially as tensions in the counter grew thicker. But she also knew the blood he carried, the blood of a man who had shaped laws and led armies. There was a fire in him that could not be extinguished by fear alone. When he finally approached his mother one evening and said he wanted to leave, her heart broke quietly. She knew this moment would come. She knew she could not hold him forever. The conversation was long, heavy with emotion. She held his face in her hands and tried to memorize every feature, every expression, knowing she might never see him again. With the quiet support of someone connected to the household, someone who knew the truth and chose compassion over silence, he was given a chance to travel north under the guise of employment. It was a dangerous journey, but he made it. In the north he began a new life, one where no one knew his past. He learned to navigate a society still deeply flawed but less rigid than the one he left behind. He found work, met people, and slowly built a life on the foundation of a truth he could never fully reveal. Back at the plantation, his siblings missed him fiercely. His mother prayed for him every night. The president's widow felt his absence quietly, though she never said so aloud. She had always known he was more than just another child on the property. He had her husband's eyes that haunted her long after her husband's death. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the storm everyone had been predicting. The Civil War broke out, the nation split, and for families like theirs, the war was more than a political conflict. It was a reckoning. The plantation became a place of fear and uncertainty. Soldiers marched through nearby towns. Supplies grew scarce. People whispered about liberation, rebellion, revenge, and survival. The enslaved community felt hope and terror in equal measure. They dreamed of freedom but feared what that freedom might cost. For the secret children of the president, the chaos was especially dangerous. If the truth of their parentage were exposed in the wrong moment, it could cost them everything: their safety, their lives, their fragile place in a world built on denial. Their mother became even more protective, guiding them through each uncertain day with calmness she did not truly feel. She taught them how to stay out of sight when tensions ran high, how to read the moods of armed men, how to understand danger before it arrived. Then, finally, freedom came. Not suddenly, not cleanly, but slowly, painfully, like a dawn struggling to break through storm clouds. When Union soldiers arrived, the enslaved people on the plantation held their breath. Some cried, some laughed, some fell to their knees in disbelief. But freedom for the president's secret children was a strange and complicated thing. They were no longer property, yet they were not fully accepted as free equals. They carried a name they could not speak, a lineage they could not claim. Some of them chose to stay temporarily, helping their mother transition into a life she had never been allowed to imagine. Others followed the path their older brother had taken, moving north, changing their identities, building new futures, becoming people the world could not easily categorize. Their descendants would eventually blend into various communities, some becoming part of Black American history, others passing silently into white America, where their origins became buried beneath generations of new names and new stories. But the truth remained alive, whispered across decades, guarded in family memories, preserved in faces that resembled a president who never spoke of them. And as time carried the world forward, the secret waited. Waited for historians, for scholars, for descendants searching for their roots, waited for a world final, ready to confront the contradictions it had built itself upon. The story, hidden for so long, began slowly resurfacing, not as rumor but as reality, not as scandal but as history. And once the truth emerged, it demanded to be heard. It demanded to rewrite the past. It demanded to restore the humanity of the women and children who had been stolen from the public memory. This is the legacy the president could never control. The years after freedom were some of the most uncertain the family had ever faced. Liberation was supposed to bring clarity, but instead it opened a door to a world they had never been prepared to walk through. For generations their lives had been controlled, their choices made by someone else. Now every sunrise brought a question the law had never allowed them to ask. What do we do now? The plantation, once rigid and orderly under the president's authority, became chaotic. With slavery abolished, labor was suddenly a matter of negotiation rather than coercion. Confusion rippled through the land as newly freed people decided whether to stay as paid workers, leave in search of family members, or build entirely new communities somewhere safer. For the president's secret children, the question of what came next was even more complex. Their identities had always existed in two worlds, but now both of those worlds were shifting beneath their feet. They were free, but freedom did not erase suspicion, prejudice, or the danger of being associated with a powerful white family in a hostile environment. Their mother tried to remain calm. Freedom was her dream, but the reality of it made her feel vulnerable in ways she had not expected. All her life she had been owned, watched, controlled, and restricted. Now she was expected to navigate decisions she had never been allowed to practice making. The children saw the weight of it in the way she paused before aching, how she stared at the horizon as if searching for answers hidden in the landscape. One evening, she gathered her children and spoke to them with a seriousness they had rarely seen. She told them that freedom did not erase danger. It made some men angrier, and anger could still be deadly. She urged them to stay smart, to move carefully, to protect one another. She reminded them that their safety depended not only on their actions but on understanding the world around them. But even in her caution, she carried a quiet hope. She believed her children deserved more than a life of silence and secrecy. She believed each of them could carve a future more meaningful than anything she had known. The oldest daughter was the first to find her path. She discovered a talent for sewing and dressmaking, a craft she had picked up from watching white women discuss fabrics and patterns over the years. She began repairing clothing for families in the area, her skill quickly earning her a reputation for neat, precise stitches. Gradually, her work became a small business, one that allowed her to earn her own money, make her own decisions, and create something that belonged entirely to her. The second son, quieter but fiercely intelligent, found opportunities in education offered by northern missionaries arriving in the South. He learned to read and write fluently, discovering a love for books that opened new worlds inside his mind. His mother watched him with pride, knowing he was accessing dreams she had never been allowed to imagine. The youngest children followed in small ways, helping in newly built schools, learning trades, exploring the meaning of independence. But through all their individual paths, they remained connected by the complex shadow of their father, a man whose legacy the world celebrated even as it ignored the family he had left behind. Meanwhile, their our brother, living far away in the north, had built a life that astonished even himself. He found acceptance in communities where people did not question his features or seek explanations. Over time, he had learned to blend in, to let the past dissolve into the background. He became a respected member of the community, a man who worked hard, kept his word, and carried himself with quiet dignity. But he never forgot the plantation. He never forgot his mother, his siblings, or the truth of where he came from. Letters, discreetly sent through trusted individuals, kept him connected to the family he had left behind. Each letter carried updates about their lives, their challenges, their hopes, and with each piece of news he felt the pull of responsibility, knowing freedom had given him an opportunity others still struggled to grasp. As the Reconstruction era began, the South became a battlefield of ideas, laws, and racial tensions. Freed people ran for office, founded schools, established newspapers. There was a brief window, a fragile window, when equality seemed possible. But the backlash was fierce. Groups formed in the shadows, riding at night, spreading fear and violence. The family felt the tremors of danger in every rumor, every hurried conversation in town, every sudden silence when strangers passed by. The president's widow watched the chaos from her porch, aging quickly under the weight of a world she no longer understood. She had lived through the war, endured humiliation, and now found herself navigating a society where the rules of her past no longer held power. Strangely, as the world changed, she developed a quiet closeness with the woman she had once owned. It did not erase the past, nor did it transform their relationship into anything like equality, but it became something delicate and complicated, a shared survival in a world rapidly turning upside down. There were afternoons when she would sit in the garden, and the woman would bring tea, and for a brief moment silence would soften the long history between them. It was not friendship, it was not forgiveness, it was something else, an unspoken recognition that both had been shaped, fractured, and trapped by a system neither had chosen. But time does not stop for grief, guilt, or unfinished stories. The president's widow eventually died, leaving behind a home filled with memories she could never fully face. Her death marked the end of the old order. With no master, no mistress, and no legal ties keeping them on the land, the family prepared to leave the plantation for good. They packed what little they owned, quilts, tools, books, letters. Before leaving, their mother walked through the house one last time. She touched the walls, remembering the years she had lived in its shadow. She whispered goodbye to rooms that had seen both the birth of her children and the secrets that had defined her life. When they stepped off the land, they felt the weight of history at their backs. But ahead of them lay the uncertain, trembling possibility of a new beginning. They settled in a small community where freed families were gathering, people rebuilding their lives with determination and hope. The siblings found work, friendships, and a sense of belonging they had never known. Their mother, though older now, embraced her new life with surprising strength. She finally had something she had never possessed: ownership of her own time. In the evenings, the family gathered under lamplight, sharing stories of their day, planning their futures, laughing in ways that once would have been forbidden. It was in these simple moments that freedom felt real. But even as the years passed, the secret of their father remained. They protected it carefully, guarding it like an ember that could again ignite or destroy. They did not speak of it to strangers. They rarely spoke of it even among themselves. The truth had shaped them, but they were determined not to let it define them. Yet secrets have a way of surviving longer than the people who keep them. Before their mother passed away, she called her children to her side. She wanted them to know everything, not just the pain, but the small moments of tenderness, the quiet gestures that complicated the story of the man who had owned her and fathered her children. She told them what she remembered, the expressions he wore when he looked at them, the books he had asked tutors to bring for them, the times he had made decisions that protected them without ever acknowledging why. She did not excuse him. She did not condemn him. She simply told the truth, and in that truth, her children found a strange peace. The years continued forward. Some siblings married, raising families of their own. Some moved north, drawn by opportunities their older brother had described. Others stayed in the South, helping to build schools, churches, and businesses in the growing black community. Their descendants would carry pieces of them, faces, mannerisms, talents, into new generations. Some would know the secret. Others would hear only fragments, uncertain whether they were legend or fact. The truth is, the story could have ended right there, buried under plantation soil, hidden inside family Bibles, erased from carefully crafted presidential biographies. But secrets like this don't stay silent forever. And this one refused to die, because every generation held on to a piece of it, a name, a whisper, a rumor that grew louder as time marched forward, waiting for someone brave enough to chase it all the way back to its beginning. The beginning wasn't in Washington, and it wasn't in the White House. It was on a quiet plantation where a young enslaved woman lived her entire life in the shadow of a house she could never enter as an equal. She was intelligent, strong, and heartbreakingly young when the story truly began. She had no voice in the world she lived in, yet the president-to-be had already decided she would become part of his world whether she wanted it or not. No one questioned him. How could they? He was a rising political star, a powerful landowner, a man whose reputation was protected more fiercely than the lives of the people he owned. He was charming, brilliant, charismatic, but also desperate. Desperate to shape his public image by any means necessary. His marriage to a woman from a respected family helped him. Her dowry helped him even more. But her sister would become something else entirely. It started quietly. A late-night visit here, an unexplained hour missing there. Enslaved people knew what was happening long before the white family did, but saying it out loud would have meant punishment, maybe death. So the truth traveled in hushed breaths, exchanged behind cabins, carried through darkness, wrapped in fear, and even then it was obvious something irreversible had begun. She was only a girl when she had her first child by him, and when she looked into the baby's face, she saw features that did not belong to her world, skin too light, eyes too familiar, a resemblance to a man who could change laws but would never change her fate. That resemblance was dangerous, but it was also undeniable. The wife noticed first, a quiet shock, a silence that lingered, a realization she could never speak out loud, because exposing him would also expose her family's shame. And so she did what generations of powerful families did when confronted with a scandal they could not erase. She buried it. She pretended it didn't exist. She allowed the girl she grew up with, her own sister, to live out her life as property, even while carrying the children of the man they both shared. And the children grew. Each one looked more like their father than the last. Each one carried a face that mirrored a man who would eventually sit in the most powerful chair in the nation. They were smart, curious, observant, but they were also enslaved, legally owned by the man who had created them, a man who spoke of liberty in public while denying it in private, a man who wrote speeches about freedom while his own blood lived in chains. The contradiction haunted him. Some nights he drank to forget. Other nights he justified it to himself, convincing his own conscience that the world was the problem, not him, that society forced him into these contradictions, that history would forgive him. He was wrong, because years later, when he rose from governor to national figure, the rumors grew alongside his fame. They followed him to every city. They whispered behind every political meeting. Opponents heard them. Journalists heard them. Even foreign diplomats whispered about the children who looked too much like him. And although newspapers at the time refused to print the full truth, everyone knew enough to see the cracks in the perfect image he tried so hard to build. But the truth, real truth, doesn't disappear, especially when 6 children share the face of a president. The first son grew tall and sharp-minded. He learned to read in secret, something forbidden but not impossible. His father noticed. He gave him tasks, responsibilities, small privileges, not enough to free him, just enough to prove to himself that he was a generous slaveholder. But the son never forgot what he truly was, a prisoner of bloodlines. The daughters grew into versions of their mother, gentle, intelligent, painfully aware of their place in a world that refused to accept who they were. They knew their lineage. They knew the truth. They also knew that one wrong word could ruin everything. The enslaved people around them protected them fiercely. They considered them almost ours, though they were also tied by blood to the master. The white family around them avoided them, pretended not to see the resemblance. Only one person, only one, loved them quietly, their mother's sister, the president's wife, because even though she could not speak the truth, she could not ignore the reality that the children were part of her bloodline too. A twisted, tragic family tree, one branch held in a mansion, the other in a cabin, all of them connected by a secret no history book dared to record, honestly. Years passed. Politics consumed him, elections rose and fell, speeches were made, deals were signed, and the children, they waited, they hoped, they wondered if their father would ever acknowledge them. When he became president, everything changed. Suddenly every part of his life became public, and the quiet secret hidden in a cabin became the biggest danger to his legacy. Advisors warned him, allies reminded him, opponents hinted at what they knew, so he made a decision that would shape the rest of their lives. He created distance. He gave them small freedoms, quiet opportunities, but never enough to expose the truth. But the children remembered. They remembered the man who visited their cabin at night. They remembered the face they shared. They remembered every promise half kept, every affection half given, every hint of love overshadowed by fear. And long after he died, the truth outlived him. The children grew older. Their children grew older, and every generation passed down the story like a sacred inheritance. Until one day, a historian listened, a researcher dug deeper, a family member finally spoke, and the secret that the president spent a lifetime burying rose back to the surface, unstoppable. The world would eventually learn that the President of the United States had created an entire hidden bloodline with his wife's enslaved sister, 6 children who carried both the burden and the truth of a history America tried to erase. The children grew into adulthood carrying a dual identity that no law, no society, no education could reconcile for them. They were part of the most powerful family in the nation, yet legally and socially treated as property. Their lives were a balancing act between fear and aspiration, obedience and survival, invisibility and identity. Every interaction with outsiders required careful navigation. A misstep could unravel their fragile safety and expose truths their father had spent decades concealing. The eldest son understood this better than anyone. He had grown under the silent gaze of the president, noticing how his father would sometimes look at him as if he knew the child could someday surpass him in wisdom, perhaps in influence. Yet he never openly acknowledged the boy as his son. It was a silent acknowledgement, a dangerous dance of recognition and denial. The son learned early that appearances were more important than reality, that a single glance could carry more weight than words. He also learned to observe people, to understand their intentions without letting them see his mind at work. This skill would later serve him well as he traveled north, seeking opportunities in a world that did not know him and yet would have treated him differently had they known his lineage. His journey north was fraught with tension. He assumed new identities, moved in secret, and relied on trusted allies who understood the family secret. He studied, worked, and quietly built a life. But the connection to his mother and siblings in the South remained ever present, pulled tight by invisible threads. Meanwhile, the daughters at home navigated the South with a combination of caution and resilience. They were educated as much as their mother could manage, learning to read and write in secret, or with the help of sympathetic teachers who risked punishment for providing instruction to enslaved people. They learned not just literacy, but the subtle art of surviving in a household that both constrained and occasionally protected them. Their mother guided them carefully, teaching them lessons in strength and patience, instructing them on how to blend, how to hide their intelligence, how to read faces and moods. She instilled pride in them, even as the world told them they were lesser, even as society tried to define them as something less than human. These lessons were not theoretical. They were matters of survival, but there were also moments of tenderness. On quiet evenings, the children would gather around the fire, and their mother would recount stories from their grandmother, from her childhood, and sometimes from the early days when their father had been present in small ways. She told these stories with care, emphasizing resilience, intelligence, and cunning over bitterness. It was her way of giving them power, even in a world designed to strip them of it. When the Civil War erupted, it added new layers of complexity to their lives. News arrived slowly at the plantation. Rumors of battles, troop movements, and shifting borders filled the community with fear and anticipation. The children realized that political upheaval could dramatically alter their future. They listened carefully to conversations among the adults, piecing together what they could from incomplete information. Some of the older children began to explore small acts of autonomy. They found work in nearby towns, sometimes secretly delivering goods or messages, sometimes learning trades that would sustain them once the chaos of war settled. These experiences, dangerous though they were, helped them develop independence and a sense of self that their father's wealth and power could never have provided openly. As emancipation finally arrived, it did not erase the complexities of their identities. They were free, yet freedom came with its own burdens. The legal and social structures that had confined them were gone, but prejudices remained deeply embedded in the community. They were now citizens in name, but still outsiders in practice. The mother, older now and wiser, guided them through this new reality with careful precision. She emphasized education, self-respect, and strategic alliances. The eldest son was encouraged to seek opportunities further north, where he could grow without constant scrutiny. The daughters were taught to navigate the delicate social structures of post-war society while retaining pride in their heritage. The president's secret bloodline began to establish itself in these uncertain times. Each child, each choice, each calculated move contributed to a future that balanced survival with dignity. Letters sent and received between siblings maintained family cohesion, even as physical distance grew. These communications carried not only updates about daily life, but also lessons, warnings, and encouragement. an invisible network designed to preserve identity and memory in a world that had long sought to erase them. Over time, the family's network expanded, including allies who recognized the truth of their situation and offered discreet assistance. Communities of freed people became a source of knowledge, protection, and economic opportunity. The children learned to navigate these networks with skill, building foundations for their own families and ensuring the survival of their lineage. But the shadow of their father's public life remained ever present. Every mention of the president, every historical account, every family story circulated in newspapers and conversations reminded them of the delicate balance they had inherited. They understood that the story of their father's secret children was more than family history. It was a reflection of the contradictions and hypocrisies of a nation that claimed liberty while practicing bondage. Generations passed. The children of the secret lineage matured into adults who understood the value of secrecy, the necessity of discretion, and the enduring importance of memory. They transmitted stories carefully to their own children, emphasizing both resilience and discretion. These stories were not just family legends, they were acts of survival, a way to preserve truth in the face of a society that had refused to recognize it. Historians, researchers, and genealogists would eventually uncover fragments of these hidden truths. DNA analysis, letters, and oral histories pieced together a narrative that challenged established accounts of the president's life. Descendants discovered connections that reshaped their understanding of both family and history. The recognition of their ancestry became a powerful affirmation of survival, identity, and the endurance of truth over decades of deliberate erasure. Even in modern times, the story of the president's secret children continues to resonate. It challenges assumptions about power, privilege, and the human cost of public image. It emphasizes the resilience of those who survived the most intimate forms of betrayal and exploitation, and it illuminates the enduring strength of memory, family, and identity in the face of historical injustice. The legacy of the president's secret bloodline is not one of shame. It is a testament to courage, intelligence, and endurance. Each generation carried forward lessons learned under oppression, carving spaces for themselves in societies that had initially denied them recognition. Their story continues to inspire historians, descendants, and the broader public to question narratives, confront uncomfortable truths, and acknowledge the lives hidden in the shadows of history. Through every challenge, every upheaval, every moment of danger or uncertainty, the family survived. Their persistence ensured that history could not fully erase them, that their identities would continue to be recognized, studied, and honored. The president's secret, once carefully buried, eventually emerged into the light, reshaping understanding of both the individual and the nation he led. And so the story lives on, not only in historical records but in the living descendants who embody resilience, wisdom, and a legacy that could not be silenced. Decades passed, and the secret of the president's children seemed almost lost to time. Generations had lived with whispers, shadows, and unspoken truths, yet memory persisted, carried through family stories, oral traditions, and quiet reminders in photographs, letters, and personal artifacts. Each story was like a thread in a tapestry, fragile but unbroken, connecting the descendants to a lineage that history had tried to bury. It was during the early 20th century that historians and genealogists began to notice inconsistencies in public records. They saw anomalies in census data, mentions of children who were unaccounted for in official documents, and letters hinting at relationships that defied social norms. Scholars, initially hesitant, began piecing together fragments of evidence. The first inklings of president's secret bloodline emerged slowly, almost imperceptibly, like faint footprints along a long-forgotten path. The family, now spread across multiple states, continued to live their lives quietly. Some had become teachers, preachers, business owners. Some had moved to cities, blending into growing black communities that offered greater opportunity and anonymity. Yet they remained aware of the extraordinary heritage that linked them to one of the nation's most powerful figures. Even if the world did not know, they carried the story forward, protecting it and nurturing it for the day it could be fully told. By the mid-20th century, technological advances and broader social changes allowed new tools for uncovering hidden histories. Descendants who were curious, persistent, or lucky began finding letters, journals, and photographs. Some encountered old plantations, abandoned homes, or family Bibles that contained names, dates, and details that had been omitted from public records. Each discovery reinforced the reality that their ancestors' lives had been intertwined with both oppression and privilege, shaping a narrative that challenged conventional historical accounts. Oral history played a crucial role. Elder family members shared memories cautiously, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in private gatherings. They described features, personalities, small gestures that were unmistakably inherited from the president. They recounted interactions, visits, and quiet acts of care that had never been recorded in any official document. These oral accounts, corroborated over time, began to form a more complete picture of the hidden lineage. Historians studying the era, initially skeptical, eventually began to acknowledge the plausibility of these accounts. They examined letters written by the president, correspondences between family members, and property records that revealed relationships invisible to conventional historical scrutiny. The pieces, once scattered, slowly coalesced into a cohesive story. It became clear that the president had indeed fathered children with his wife's enslaved sister, children whose existence had been carefully concealed for decades. DNA analysis in the later 20th and early 21st centuries provided definitive proof. Genetic testing confirmed relationships that had been suspected for generations, connecting descendants to the president in ways that left no room for doubt. This scientific validation transformed oral history and fragmented records into incontrovertible evidence. Families could finally reconcile stories passed down with tangible proof, merging memory with modern technology. The revelation sent ripples through both academic circles and public discourse. Historians revisited biographies of the president, re-evaluating narratives that had previously ignored the enslaved family. Public interest grew, with journalists, filmmakers, and writers examining the moral complexities of a man who had shaped a nation while concealing such an intimate and consequential secret. The story became not just a revelation about an individual, but a lens through which to examine the broader contradictions of American history: power, slavery, privilege, and the resilience of those whom society sought to erase. Descendants of the secret lineage embraced the recognition cautiously. Many were proud, feeling validation of the stories they had carried for generations. Others were wary, knowing that public exposure could attract scrutiny, misinterpretation, or sensationalism. Yet collectively, the family recognized the significance. They were living proof of survival, endurance, and the persistence of truth. The story also reshaped public understanding of the president, once celebrated solely for his political accomplishments. The nuanced reality revealed a man whose life encompassed both leadership and moral contradiction. He was capable of brilliance and cruelty, of ambition and secrecy, of paternal care and systemic oppression. This duality became central to how historians, educators, and the public reinterpreted his legacy. The descendants, now fully aware of their heritage, began documenting their history themselves. They recorded oral testimonies, collected letters, and preserved artifacts that told the story of survival, resilience, and identity. They ensured that future generations would know not just the public figure, but the children who lived in shadows, the women who bore the burdens of both love and exploitation, and the complex truths that ordinary textbooks had long ignored. In the present day, the narrative has reached a wider audience through books, documentaries, and academic research. Museums and cultural institutions have begun to incorporate these stories into broader exhibitions about slavery, the presidency, and the enduring impact of hidden histories. Students learn not just about political achievements but also about the human cost of the institution of slavery and how personal stories intersect with national narratives. The significance of the president's secret, children, extends beyond lineage. It is a testament to human resilience, to the endurance of identity, and to the eventual triumph of truth over concealment. Their story demonstrates that even in the darkest corners of history, memory persists. Even when silence dominates, evidence survives. And when descendants and researchers finally collaborate across time, the hidden legacies of the past can emerge into the light. This is the story of a family whose lives were shaped by secrecy, survival, and extraordinary courage. It is the story of a mother who protected her children against impossible odds, of children who navigated freedom with wisdom inherited from generations of careful observation, and of descendants who would eventually bring the truth to the world. It is a story that reminds us all, history is never as simple as it seems, and the lives of those hidden in shadows are just as important as the lives of those celebrated in history books. The president's secret bloodline is no longer hidden. Their story serves as both a correction and an expansion of the historical record, a reminder that the personal and political, the hidden and the public, are often intertwined in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. Their survival, endurance, and eventual recognition symbolize the ultimate power of truth. It cannot be erased, no matter how long it is concealed. The children matured into adults. They faced the world with both caution and courage. Each one had internalized the lessons of secrecy from their mother, yet they also carried a deep awareness of the extraordinary lineage they embodied. They understood that their father's public life was a paradox. He wielded immense power and influence, yet had created a private reality that placed them in danger, even as he provided small protections. The eldest son became the de facto leader of the siblings, not by choice, but by circumstance. His intelligence, physical resemblance to their father, and keen understanding of human behavior made him a natural guide. He navigated complex social structures in a post-slavery South, negotiating work, shelter, and education for himself and his younger siblings. Every decision he made was informed by the delicate balance of survival and aspiration. The daughters found their own paths within the constraints of society. One became a skilled artisan, sewing and crafting garments that gained quiet recognition in the community. Another pursued education, secretly teaching children who had once been denied literacy. Each daughter carried a combination of resilience, intelligence, and subtle defiance, demonstrating that strength did not always need to be loud to be effective. The younger sons explored trades and skills that allowed them to establish independence. They worked as carpenters, blacksmiths, and laborers, earning respect in communities that valued their talents, but could not fully recognize their heritage. Each step forward was both a practical necessity and an act of quiet rebellion against a system that had once sought to control every aspect of their lives. Their mother remained the central figure in the family, a constant source of guidance, wisdom, and protection. She had lived through unimaginable hardships, personal violation, systemic oppression, and societal denial, and yet she instilled in her children the importance of dignity, strategy, and perseverance. She emphasized that while they could not change the past, they could shape the future by understanding their strengths and the power of knowledge. The siblings also had to contend with societal perceptions of race, class, and legitimacy. The community was aware, in fragments, of their connection to the president. Some viewed them with curiosity, others with suspicion, and yet others with cautious respect. They navigated these perceptions with the skills their mother had taught them: observation, discretion, and measured engagement. Love and family bonds became their anchor. The children, though aware of the dangers and the stigma surrounding their existence, relied on one another for emotional support. They celebrated small victories together, mourned losses collectively, and shared a profound understanding of the complexities that defined their lives. Each sibling's achievements, though modest in a society still structured to marginalize them, were magnified by the adversity they had overcome. When news of the broader societal changes reached them, abolition, Reconstruction, and the slow shift toward civil rights, they weighed opportunities carefully. Some chose to remain in the South, participating in community building, education, and economic development. Others, following the path of the eldest son, moved north to escape scrutiny and pursue a life where their lineage could be less of a liability. Letters between the siblings maintained the family's cohesion across distances. These correspondences contained practical guidance, personal encouragement, and fragments of family history that had yet to be publicly acknowledged. They preserved identity, memory, and connection in a world that often sought to erase such ties. The shadow of their father persisted. Even as he became a historical figure celebrated for political achievements, the private reality of his children complicated the narrative. They understood that their existence challenged traditional accounts of leadership, morality, and public image. This awareness was both a burden and a source of power, shaping their understanding of history and their place within it. Over time, some of the children married and raised families of their own. They instilled the values of resilience, education, and dignity in the next generation. They shared portions of the truth selectively, aware that the full story carried risks, but committed to ensuring that their descendants understood the realities of their ancestry. The eldest son, who had traveled north, established himself as a respected member of his new community. He built a home, earned a livelihood, and remained in discreet contact with siblings in the South. He embodied the intersection of survival and ambition, demonstrating that the skills learned under oppression could be transformed into instruments of independence and influence. The daughters continued their work in education, artisan crafts, and community engagement. They became mentors to younger women, ensuring that skills, knowledge, and resilience were passed down. They understood the symbolic importance of their work, not only as practical contributions, but as acts of empowerment and preservation of identity. The younger sons, in trades and business, became examples of economic self-determination. They navigated a society still structured by racial prejudice while asserting their presence and capabilities. Their efforts, though often invisible in historical records, were profound acts of agency and survival. As the 20th century progressed, the family began to engage more openly with historical researchers. They provided oral histories, personal artifacts, and photographs that confirmed the narratives long whispered within the family. Scholars began to reconcile previously unexplained anomalies in census records, property documents, and correspondence with the stories shared by descendants. By the late 20th century, scientific advances in genetics offered definitive proof of the familial connections. DNA testing confirmed that descendants across multiple states were indeed related to the president. This scientific validation transformed speculation and anecdote into historical fact. The evidence allowed historians, genealogists, and the public to finally acknowledge the scope and significance of the hidden lineage. The modern descendants leveraged this reckon to engage with broader cultural and educational initiatives. They collaborated with universities, museums, and media outlets to ensure that their history was represented accurately and respectfully. They emphasized the importance of understanding personal narratives alongside national history, showing how individual lives intersect with systemic structures and public legacies. The acknowledgement of their lineage also prompted reflection on moral complexity. The president, revered for political accomplishments, was now recognized as a man whose private actions were ethically fraught. The descendants emphasized that understanding his legacy required grappling with both public achievements and private transgressions, recognizing the humanity and contradictions inherent in historical figures. In contemporary society, the story of the president's secret children has become a powerful example of historical reclamation. It illustrates the resilience of families, the endurance of truth, and the necessity of confronting uncomfortable realities. Descendants continue to educate, advocate, and preserve their heritage, ensuring that the lessons of survival, courage, and identity remain accessible to future generations. The legacy of the family is multifaceted. It is a story of survival under oppression, of the delicate navigation of power and secrecy, and of the eventual triumph of truth over concealment. It demonstrates the enduring impact of personal histories on broader narratives and the importance of acknowledging lives previously hidden from public view. Through education, advocacy, and documentation, the descendants of the president's secret children have transformed what was once a hidden lineage into a source of strength, inspiration, and historical clarity. They ensure that the story of their family, once concealed in shadows, now illuminates the complexities of history, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring significance of truth.